Night school.
Night school.
So we're playing with a new format.
Mm-hmm.
The goal today is just talk about a specific subject that I've been mulling around, and I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on it too.
Cool.
Um, my goal is to talk about the divine feminine, talk about what it means that we, in Christian terms, are the bride of Christ or the bride of God. Talk about the basic archetypal forces of masculinity and femininity, and not say anything remotely offensive to anybody who lives in the modern world.
All right. We'll
We
see
were
how it
just
goes.
me and Raleigh were just talking off camera right before we started about how conversations about gender, even like the archetypal qualities of femininity and masculinity, are always filled with more disclaimers than claims. Like it's
Yeah.
always like, so, and I'm not saying, and it's like, what are we saying? Are we saying anything, or are we just not saying? Are we just
Yeah.
narrowing down things about gender that are offensive and untrue, and hoping that that process eventually leads us into something true about what the forces of gender, what masculinity and femininity are essentially?
Is there
Um,
any way we can just like throw a blanket of all disclaimers?
oh yeah, all disclaimers.
All disclaimers now.
Insert. Post your disclaimers in the comments before you watch. So there's this whole doctrine of the yin and yang, right? And I think a lot of times the yin gets over associated with the feminine and the yang gets over associated with the masculine. And the reason I say that is that there's a lot of ways to summarize being itself or reality into two different sides and say reality is kind of like half subjective, half objective.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of matter and spirit. It's kind of femininity and masculinity. Uh, uh, what's another one? Imposing your will and will being imposed on you, as in you shape the world, but the world also shapes you.
Mm-hmm.
There's emptiness and there's somethingness. There's whiteness and there's blackness. There's fullness and there's emptiness. Um, and there's light and there's dark. And all of these different ways of describing reality in two halves are strategies that we use. They're limited strategies. You know, they're limited ideas. They aren't like the Tao is that of which nothing can be said. You can't directly describe God. You can't directly describe reality or being with a capital B, but you can say it's the union of the subjective and objective. It's the union of nothing and something. And describing it in two halves like that helps paint a picture that can't be directly stated. And describing reality in two parts like that is the closest that we can get to describing reality directly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's really useful. Well, one of the things that sounds a little offensive about describing the qualities of yin and yang, and untrue, because I don't care what's offensive, but it's not true to associate femininity directly with chaos and yin, and then associate masculinity directly with order and yang, because those are two different um, dualistic perspectives. Like you could say that reality is half nothing, half something. It's the union of somethingness and nothingness. And you could say it's the union of masculinity and femininity. But that doesn't directly mean that chaos, femininity, blackness, nothingness, emptiness are all the same things. It means
Mm-hmm.
that the yin can be described with all five of those different archetypal qualities.
Okay.
So the feminine and the blackness and the emptiness are like sub-archetypes of the archetype that is yin.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean that femininity is chaos. It means that femininity and chaos are two sub-archetypes of the basic archetype of the yin.
Okay.
So it's like you could say, well, the yang has these six qualities, right? The yang is imposing your will. The yang is the masculine. The yang is the something. Uh, the yang is object and form. And then you can say of the yin all these other things. It doesn't mean that every quality of the yang are the same as each other. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to, so this is something that Richard Tarnas said in Cosmos and Psyche, which is a book about astrology, but it talks about the meaning of archetypes, what archetypes essentially are.
Right.
And archetypes are like basic themes or symbols that are so essential or so foundational to the way we understand reality that they don't even have to be described. They aren't described, they're evoked. So what it means that they're not described, they're evoked, is that they're more often qualities that are used to describe things than they are themselves described. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to describe to you what red is, for example.
Right.
Red I evoke because we assume a common understanding of red because red is so basic to reality.
Yeah.
Everything that we see is one of these small list of colors or a combination of that small list of colors. So I don't have to say red is like strawberry apple lipstick. I say lipstick is red, strawberry is red, apple is red, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So femininity is like that. Femininity is not something that we describe. Femininity is a force that we all subjectively know exists and that we evoke as a matter of defining something else. So we could say that this couch is feminine in the sense that it comforts us. And we could say that it's masculine in the sense that it props us up to speak. So you could use those basic forces to describe things.
Okay.
But to describe the basic forces of yin and yang, you have to break each of those archetypes, because those archetypes are so basic to the nature of reality that you have to break them into subcategories and say, here's 6 archetypal qualities of the yang, here's 6 archetypal qualities of the yin. Now you get the yin yang, and the answer, if the person is open-minded and honest, is yeah, I get what you're saying. You see how half of reality is the somethingness, the imposing, the masculine, the object, and you see how the other half is the feminine, the blackness, the emptiness, the comfort, the void, the mother. You see, and then go, oh, okay, I get the yin and yang. They're so basic that they go beyond masculinity and femininity. So in some ancient scriptures, it's said that humans are the bride of God, or they are to become the bride of God.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also said in the Gospel of Thomas, in saying 22, that the male must become no longer male and the female must become no longer female. And the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu continuously stresses the feminine and the masculine aspects of the divine, because the goal of these scriptures is to get somebody to the state of consciousness that's aligned with being itself, the state of consciousness that is neither this nor that, but is union with it. And so Jesus doesn't say, I'm God here to tell you what the fuck is up. He's saying, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. He's saying, I am in a state of consciousness that is union with the divine. I'm in the divine and the divine is in me. Not I'm in the divine and you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Or the divine is in me but not in you.
Right.
He's describing what Maharishi of the Hindu tradition calls unity consciousness. And I think that to understand the yin and yang, or to understand the sub-aspects of the yin and yang, masculinity and femininity, is to try to understand how, at the most basic level, you are that which cannot be described as either masculine or feminine, cannot be described as either imposing its will on reality or having reality's will imposed on it. It is neither this or that. It's in union with the divine. Okay. And so there's this Christian idea that you have to start with I think that the term that it uses is milk. You have to start with milk before you get to the steak or the meat. It's saying like you have to start with the absolutely simple and basic before you get to the complex. And I've had Christian pastors utilize that passage to mean that you shouldn't approach complex ideas until you have digested the basic doctrines of the church. And I think that what it means is closer to Elon Musk's strategy for innovation, which is always start with basic principle. Don't make of a bunch of implicit assumptions that you don't even articulate and then try to innovate from there. So don't say, okay, well, everybody else told me how cars work and how rockets work, so I'm going to start from there and go from there. Elon Musk says, fuck that. I'm going back to basic principles. What even is a battery? It's just these 3 or 4 things. How can we do that better? So I think that
So he's making no assumptions or trying to carry as little baggage about the way things are currently built along with it.
Right. So I think that's the engineering equivalent of starting with milk before you eat steak.
Okay.
I think that's the kind of thinking that the Bible is trying to describe when it says that. It's not saying like, because imagine if an engineer was trying to limit Elon Musk's innovation by saying the milk is insert all my ideas about engineering. No, that's not the milk. Mm-hmm. The milk is just like the laws of motion. Like, let's go back to the very, very simplest ideas, because the simplest ideas, or the most basically archetypal ideas, are also the most profound and also the deepest. and also the most original, the most like the closest to the origin,
Mhm.
the ideas that you need to start with. And so I think something that Western religion is lacking is that task of going back to what's absolutely basic. What is the yin and the yang? What is the masculine and the feminine? And I think that one of the two-sided dynamics found at the very basic level of reality is that of matter and spirit,
Mhm.
or that of form and spirit, or that of somethingness and nothingness.
Mhm.
And to
Form and
think,
void, maybe is what you're looking
yeah,
for.
form and void is a
Yeah.
great one. Thank you.
Yeah.
So to think of ourselves in terms of ideas that simple or that basic or that close to God, we could realize that one of the false assumptions preventing us from achieving union with the divine is the idea that we're objects navigating stuff that's something else. So
Mhm.
for example, if say this room didn't have this stuff in it, right? This room was just walls and a floor. If we walked into the room, our basic tenets of reality, our basic philosophies say this room was empty, and now that I'm in the room has something in it. It had nothing in it, now it has something in it, because I'm something, and all the space in this room is nothing.
Okay.
So that's a basic idea behind what is mythologically materialist. And when I say mythologically, I'm saying that because it's a myth that we are material, but that this is space. In reality, the vast majority of your body is space. Like you're made of tiny little, and I don't have the proper scientific terms to describe this. You guys can probably help me out with them.
Yeah.
But you're made of tiny little atoms that are really far away from each other, which
There's
are
the
made
nucleus in the middle, and the electrons are spinning around it, but they're going up.
electrons and
relatively-
protons, right?
Electrons spin around it, protons are in the nucleus.
Thank you.
So there's a bunch of space in between the nucleus and the electrons that are spinning around, yeah.
Right, and then a bunch of space between the atoms, that those things, and so
Yeah.
almost all of you is just space.
Right.
So that's why I say that materialism is mythological, because it's a subjective idea on which we base our understanding of realities. We say you're something, I'm something, everything here is nothing.
Mhm.
That's not physically rational. According to the field of physics, that's not rational, but it's something that we believe. And so something that you need to do in order to break that belief and achieve union with God, or achieve the realization that everything is connected and that you're a part of that, is you have to become female. So what does that mean? Well, what if instead of thinking that when the room was empty, what if instead of thinking that before you came into the room was empty, and that once you came into the room then contained something, you just thought of the fact that the room was all space before you entered, and after you entered, the room was all space too. That sort of idea, to hold that sort of idea in your mind, is to hold the idea that the same space that this room is made up is the same space that you're made up of. And following that line of thinking, you're not separate from the room. You're not a differentiated object from the room.
Mm-hmm.
From a certain level of analysis, you and the room are made of the same thing. And so in one sense, there's boundaries that define what's Raleigh and define what's not Raleigh.
Mm-hmm.
But in another sense, or from another level of analysis, I should say, that boundary isn't relevant. There's really no separation between you and the room. And so to achieve union with the divine, we have to get to that point where we realize that there is no ultimate separateness between what we call us and what we call not us. And here's why that is the consciousness equivalent of becoming female. Because, and this is a sexual example, because I just think it's such a glaringly obvious example that it needs to be said. The materialist perspective is that the room was empty, and when you came into the room, unfortunately, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think language is connected like that for a reason. You came into the room, you penetrated the room with somethingness. So the room is nothing, and then you, somethingness, matter, penetrated the room. So that's a masculine perspective. Space is around me. I'm matter. I penetrate space. I'm in space.
Okay.
But union with the divine, or the state of consciousness that is union with the divine, doesn't consider the self to be something that is penetrating the other. It considers the self and the other to be made up all of one thing. So you can't really know that you're connected with God. Jesus, I don't think that Jesus could know that he is in the Father and the Father was in him if he considered the boundaries of his physical body to be absolute, an absolute separation between him and everything else. And so
Right.
the truth isn't that God is in me, because that would mean that God was in me in particular, and that would mean that I would think that I'm more God than you and Evan. But the truth is also not that God is in me, you, and Evan, because that would be another level of psychotic egoism. That is not psychotic egoism placing myself on a pedestal above you too, but a psychotic egoism that is placing human space over non-human space,
Gotcha.
which is a psychotic egoism that humanity itself is inflicted with right now.
Meaning that like you think that it needs to extend to all living things, or that it needs to extend to all things?
All things.
Okay.
Yeah, all things. And so when a person says, I've done this, I'm God, everyone around knows that it's crazy, because, well, if you think that you in particular were created, or that if you think that you, a creation of the creator of everything, are more that creator than everybody around you, there's clearly something not oriented in you psychologically in a way that's proper or useful. That doesn't make sense. So the creator of everything is you more than it is the guy next to you. Lock him up. That doesn't make sense. Even though we claim freedom of religion and everything, and you should be able to say any religious view you want, that idea is so inherently crazy that you'll be put in a cage for saying it. So we understand how crazy it is, which is correct. But we don't understand how crazy it is to think that humans are inherently God and that everything around us is not God.
Mm-hmm.
And to break that, to grow out of that myth, or break the habit of thinking that way, is to become female, because it is to consider the self something that's being penetrated by God, rather than thinking of the self as something that is penetrating God. And obviously I don't mean that in a way that's inherently sexual, but if you took the basic archetypal forces of masculinity and femininity and you drew them as puzzle pieces, the feminine is the one that has the gap, and that has the concave, and the masculine is the thing that has the convex.
Mm-hmm.
And that basic archetypal philosophy also manifests itself at the level of sex, but it's not inherently sexual. The sexual act of the man penetrating the woman is just a side effect of that basic archetypal quality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
As
so,
above, so below.
right, as
Yeah.
above, so below. And the quote in Gospel of Thomas that I'm referring to, when Jesus talks about the male not being particularly male and the female not being female, he mentions the above and below thing as well. He says, they say, when will we enter the kingdom? He says, when you make the two into one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below. That is, to make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male and the female will not be female. And so it is so fucking Eastern what he's saying, that it's no wonder the Gospel of Thomas is banned by people who believe that Christianity is the true religion and the other religions are false religions. It's so fucking Eastern, because he's describing reality, first of all, in multiple two-sided examples. He's evoking the yin and yang with different language, saying reality is the above and below. When they become one, that's the kingdom of heaven. Reality is the male and female. When they become one, that is the kingdom of heaven. And so I think that what he's describing is the same thing that Maharishi is describing when he talks about unity consciousness. So Maharishi, he was a guru for the Beatles and all sorts of other Westerners. What were his like golden years of teaching, Evan? Maharishi Mahesh or Mahesh Yogi? I always get that mixed up. But he was an Eastern teacher for the West, and he described like 5 or 6 levels of consciousness, and cosmic consciousness was one of the higher ones, and then something else, and then the top one was unity consciousness. And I think that
Cosmic is not the highest.
no, I
There's
think it was
people above
cosmic.
cosmic.
I think it was cosmic, God, unity. And I don't know why they're arranged in that way, but I think that the unity consciousness that he's talking about is the same as what Jesus is saying when he says, when you make the two into one, when you don't, that you consciously are living in the way of the kingdom of God, when you don't consider yourself fundamentally to be either male or female, either spirit or matter, either physical or not, either void or somethingness. You don't think that you're either this or that, because you identify, because you're at one with the Tao, and the Tao is that of which nothing can be said. And I think that's why Jesus had to dodge questions in such an awkward way. And he wasn't dodging them, and I don't mean that he really was dodging questions. I mean that it seems to a finite materialist mind that he was dodging questions, because he didn't answer them directly, because he couldn't, because he was that of which nothing could be said. And so you give all these weird answers like this.
Yeah, these are hard concepts to get.
They're too easy to get.
They're too easy to get.
They're too easy to get. So like, because he says that you have to become like a little child. And actually, I dropped this part out of this quote because it wasn't relevant to what I was talking about. But the question they really asked was, when will we enter the kingdom as little ones? Because he had just told them, these little ones are like those who enter the kingdom. And so the ideas that he's talking about are too simple. They're too easy to get. They are easier to understand in basic mindless silence than they are through intellectual conversation. Because, like I said, like they're the milk. These ideas are the milk. These ideas are the bread and butter of thinking. These ideas are the basic principles of reality. And so I think that it's hard for people who know 10,000 things. It's hard for the Western mind that knows 10,000 things to forget those 10,000 things and think about what is just basic. Like Alan Watts, in his lecture, this is on Spotify if you want to look it up. There's a Ram Dass and Alan Watts collaboration that was put together by their followers and children long after they passed away. And in that lecture, Alan Watts says, will you please check your opinions and ideas at the door? And what he's saying is, will you please set aside the 10,000 bits of information floating around in your brain that you think are going to eventually lead you to union with the divine? Because if you could set them all down for a second, you could see what is basic about reality. You can understand reality in these 6 different two-sided examples: masculine and the feminine, the something and nothing, the black and the white, the fullness and the void, whatever the other one, subjective and objective, matter and spirit. Just understand reality in all of these different two-sided examples. And I think that you could draw a kind of mandala, is that how you say that?
I think so.
With those. So you could say the yin-yang is the masculine and feminine. It's also the subjective and objective. It's also the matter and spirit. It's also the white and the black. It's also the fullness and the emptiness. I think you could draw all of those sort of Venn diagrams around with being, capital B, at the center. So you draw all those two-sided examples and you go, now imagine what would simultaneously and equally encompass all of those two-sided concepts. That's the Tao. And there's nothing you can say directly about that. But the closest that you can get is to compare it to two-sided things on multiple levels. Those concepts are like the closest that you can get to the Tao. So it's like, look at it from this angle, the masculine. Now look at it from the opposite angle. Now look at it at this angle, the white. Now look at it from the opposite angle. Now that you've seen it from all these different angles, this is as close as we can get you to it intellectually. Now imagine what it is that we're pointing at with all of these little concepts. And all those concepts are so simple.
Yeah.
It's not like read the entire Bible and understand all the details of the story of man falling from God consciousness and then being introduced back to it by the Christ who was God. Understand this entire story. It's direct. I think it's too simple.
You say that's the Tao. I just want to clarify what we mean by the word Tao.
Please.
So Tao, it means way, correct? So when you say it in that context, when I hear Tao, I sometimes think of the way, but I also sometimes think of God or of being, as you kind of referenced it. How would you say that you are using the word there? Like,
So it is the way, and it is also God, because when we find God psychologically, when we go through the psychological experience of encountering God, and our consciousness is fundamentally changed as a result of that psychological experience, we do not instantly transform into a perfect, pure ball of light that is removed from matter. So we don't literally become God instantly, because we're still finite creations with objective boundaries existing in finite time. So to conceptualize God is to orient oneself psychologically in the proper direction. It's not to instantly achieve the goal, but it is to understand and conceptualize the goal for the first time. And so
okay,
to understand God is to live the way. So it's simultaneously the path to God and God.
if you get
And
on it.
if you get on it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't think that there is a such thing as encountering God and then saying, no, I'm not gonna I'm gonna go a different way. I don't think that there's a such thing as discovering the way and then saying, no, I'm gonna do something worse and more difficult. Like
Hmm.
the way is so good and so pure and so irresistible, and it so fulfills deep desires that we've always had, and so fills voids that we've always had, that when we find it, I, I I don't think that there is a such thing as just going, I'm good, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Ram Dass once said that once you've gotten on the path, there is no getting off of it. That like sometimes you might be going slower or faster, and it might feel like you're not on the path anymore, but once you've gotten on it, there's no getting off.
I think also once you've gotten on the path, you realize that you've always been on the path at the same time, because
Mm.
because there's a scripture, every knee will bow, and it doesn't mean everybody eventually will be converted to Christianity. It means everybody eventually will unify with the oneness of God, because that's what everybody's really looking for. Some in more ignorant ways than others, but all in ways that are flawed. You
Hmm.
know, so even if you are whatever Christians would consider to be the antithesis of Christ, you're doing all of that to still eventually get back to the kingdom that
Hmm.
Christ is talking about. You know, you're in a different way. You're trying to get to the same thing. And we're all striving to get to the same thing in different ways. Everybody will eventually get there. But once you have consciously, because you're subconsciously looking for God, everyone is. Everyone is subconsciously looking for God. And I'm not talking about something strictly Christian. There's plenty of people who are going to church every morning and pretending to be satisfied, who haven't encountered God psychologically and are subconsciously looking for God, and maybe even considering leaving their church because they want to go find God somewhere else, and they
Hmm.
need to go take a different angle to figure it out,
Yeah.
because this angle's not working.
Yeah.
But everybody subconsciously is looking for the same thing, looking for the Tao. And I
I
think
think that's
that
true. Yeah.
once that goes from being subconscious to conscious, or at least less subconscious and more conscious, and one has experienced psychologically what God really is, then you have no choice but to be oriented in that direction. And there's just, I don't think that you can encounter that and then go, no, I'm going to take something less truthful, less loving, less graceful, less right, less fulfilling, you
Right.
know. And so when I hear someone say, dude, I'm checking out church for the first time because I'm looking for God, I'm like, fucking phenomenal. I cry sometimes. It's fucking awesome.
Hmm.
And when I hear somebody say, dude, I'm leaving my church because it doesn't feel right and I'm looking for God, same thing. God, that's genuine. God, that's authentic.
Hmm.
That's really a person seeking God. So I'm not saying something that's inherently like churchy or religious, but some basic truth at the center of reality that we're all seeking. And so to get back to the masculinity femininity thing,
Yeah.
when I first heard the Christian idea that we are the bride of God, and the Taoist emphasis on understanding and holding to the feminine, I was thinking, well, these books were written these books were written for men. Maybe these books were written at a time where they were directed at men. And so if they were directed at women, they might say the opposite. They might say, you need to become a man. And maybe those need to be translated and updated for the more egalitarian times that we're living in.
Yeah.
Because I do think, like, I don't buy the idea that all of culture up to this point has been tyrannically male dominated, and that we have ruled over women with an iron fist, and all of this, like, this dramatic demonization of masculinity. I don't fucking buy for a second. Except in the sense that masculinity and femininity probably push back and forth against each other. You know, there's probably times that you bully Sarah and times that Sarah bullies you. There's because a relationship is like, it's complementary, but it's also competitive. It's also and if it's healthy, strengthening each other in that process, and moving forward and going, oh, I learned to push back against you, and I've learned something about myself through that, and you're pushing back against me. So I'm not saying that there isn't dominant tyrannical patriarchy in our history, but I think that the postmodern perspective is men have always been assholes throughout all of history up until now, and it changes now. And I think it's more like that it's gone back and forth, because that does seem like the natural way of things to me. But I've gotten a little off track. So Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas does say that Mary, because the disciples who are more patriarchally minded than Christ, question Mary being in on things, and Jesus says she will become male. I will guide her to become male. But then he also says to them, the male will become female and the female will become male. So yes, and I think that in a sense that women need to become male and men need to become female in order to achieve unity consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But in another sense, I think there's something about the state of materialism that is hyper masculine in itself. Like, to go through life thinking that you're imposing your will on reality all the time, I think is a hyper masculine kind of narcissistic perspective. Like, I go through life and I impose my will on life. I move and things move around me, you know? Women might be more likely to look at a situation and go, how did that change me? How did I learn from that? And men, but especially bullying dominant men, look at a situation and go, what did everybody learn from me, motherfuckers? You know, like, there's bosses and supervisors that are like that. And I think it's a hyper masculine delusion to think that you're happening to reality and that you're shaping reality. You are happening to reality, and you are shaping reality, and also reality is happening to you, and reality is shaping you. Just like every good game has, this is something that Alan Watts points out, every good game has an element of luck and an element of skill. You get the hand that you're dealt, but then what are you going to do with that? So your will is part of the game, but also the divine will is part of the game. So fate is part of the game, and you're part of the game. It's an interplay. You happen to life happens to you, and as physical beings, I think we tend to live in the delusion that we happen to life. Oh, we're fucking physical, you know, like, we're objective form. I can fucking throw this thing, and it's like, dude, but life is beating you up and shaping you and changing you and regenerating your cells every single day. You're nothing. As Paul says, you're mist. That's what Paul calls people. You're a mere mist passing by. You're here one day and gone the next.
It's interesting in the context of, like, talking about how we're mostly space.
Yeah.
Like, atomically, like, mist is kind of the same. Mist is the same way, but obviously when you look at it, you can tell that, like, that is mostly space, but there are drops of water in it.
Right, and I do think that I'm guessing and estimating that that's how an enlightened physicist would describe a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Atomic mist. And there's a letter that Albert Einstein wrote to a friend's wife after said friend passed away, where he said, that people like him and said friend do not fear or mourn death because they understand that time is an illusion and all this. I don't know exactly what the direct quote is, but he's like, we don't fear death. Time is an illusion. We understand things from a higher perspective than that. He did too, and I do. And he was saying it to bring comfort to his friend's widow.
I'm not sure if that would work, but I get the
If
spirit
that
of
would
it.
bring comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Albert Einstein wasn't the smartest with women. So, yeah, maybe it didn't work. But I think that that Albert Einstein's deep understanding of physics and Paul's deep understanding of our relationship with God and the wisdom that Paul gained from his encounter with the Christ led them both to grow out of the materialism, the myth of materialism, the myth that you're physical and this right here is space. So right now my hand, somethingness, is moving through nothingness. Bullshit. You're mostly nothingness and you don't know exactly what you're moving through right here. Maybe physicists do. I don't know. We need to read more physics. But I also think that it's interesting that the way that Christ tells us to pray, the Lord's Prayer, is all there's nothing about the Lord's Prayer that involves the will of the person praying, besides the fact of the prayer itself being that the person is willing the prayer. There's nothing in the contents of the prayer that relate to the individual prayer's will.
Is it long, and do you know it?
It's not long, and I only know it in Aramaic. But
Okay.
So what is the Lord's Prayer basically? Give us the bread, give us the
Our
food.
Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy
Wait,
will
can
be
I?
done.
Oh, you got
Start-
a mic.
Yeah, you have a mic. You can grab the mic.
Oh,
So go line by line, and I'll translate it into English.
the internet's slow. I'm trying to get it up.
So
Oh, I thought you knew it.
Yeah, it's. I'm gonna do King James.
yeah,
Do Aramaic.
classic King James.
It says, "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name."
So our Creator that transcends us, we commit to considering you to be holy and divine. Hallowed be thy name, saying keep thy name holy, keep thy name honored.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven.
So that's saying the way of things where you reside, make our way of things where we reside more like that.
Make below as above.
Yes.
Give us this day our daily bread.
Give us what we need to survive today. He always used the bread example as like the basic, just the gas that you need to get your car going today.
Okay.
And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors.
Yeah, so people say that in Christianity you're automatically forgiven for everything. Jesus absolutely never said that God hands out free forgiveness. Every time Jesus talked about forgiveness, he said, you'll be forgiven as much as you forgive. You want to let everything go? We'll fucking let you off too. You don't get one side without the other.
Yeah.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Yeah, so for thine is the kingdom and the glory forever. He's saying all of this belongs to you.
Yeah.
So all of that prayer is a giving away. It's a giving away of one's own will. It's a giving away of one's own vision for the world. It's a giving away of one's right to resentment and a giving away of one's debts. So I give away all the karma associated with me, good and bad. I give away my own vision for the world. I give away my own will. And which is really similar to the way that the 12-step program tells people to pray, which is give me the power to do what I need to do today to shape the world into your vision, essentially. And so there is something that prayer is all about submitting.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in that prayer that's like, this is not some fucking Oprah Winfrey The Secret shit. Like, this is not like, God, give me exactly what I want. This is, God, give me exactly what you want, which is a way smarter prayer, because that which transcends you knows way better what you want than you think you know.
True.
So God, give me what you're going to give me, do your will, shape the world into your vision. It's all a giving away and it's all a submitting. And I hate that people can be led away from God with the misconception that there is something about that process that takes away from your freedom as a person, because it will give you more freedom than anything. And so an example that I have of that is I was talking with a meditation teacher, and I had asked the meditation teacher a question about the teachings that I had been given. And he had told me, he said, you'll get more out of the process if you're innocent. Be innocent. And I understand the importance of the doctrine of innocence in terms of spirituality, but I innocently trust and submit to God.
Mhm.
I trust and innocently submit to the divine will, not whoever the fuck taught you meditation. And so I easily and confidently said back to him on the phone, even though he's an authority figure and that can make you nervous, when an authority figure says, be innocent, which is essentially saying, shut the fuck up and do what you're told. I said, I don't appreciate being told that I can't ask questions. I submit to God. I don't submit to other people. If a human being tells me something, I don't innocently submit to that. Because Jesus said, call no man on earth father, call no man on earth teacher. I am your teacher. I am your father. I being the divine, not being the Nazarene. And so
Sorry,
there's
the Nazarene, does that mean Jesus?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's something really gangster about that, actually. Like, nobody's going to tell me what to do but God. That's what that level of submission gives you. And so I think that it's there's a misunderstanding in Christianity that the feminine submits to the masculine, and what that means is that the masculine tells the feminine what to do. That seems like a real misread on the spirit of those doctrines to me, because what it's saying is, whether you're a man or a woman, submit completely to God. And there's some shit in the New Testament that says, wives, submit to your husbands. But the thing that's misleading about that, or the thing that's incomplete about that statement, is that it's also saying, women, submit to your husbands, and husbands, love the church as Christ loved the church. So he's describing how an unbreakable, God-like bond can be created between the masculine and the feminine. And he's saying, as far as I can tell, the way you do that is the man, you will do anything for the woman. You will die for the woman, and your purpose is to uplift the woman. And uplifting her means empowering her, encouraging her, giving her strength, granting her free will. And God grants free will to creation. God doesn't create something and then go, now do what the fuck I say. God is more, hey, I'm going to purify your character and set you up to be autonomous and creative and intelligent. I gave you that. Those are my qualities, and I gave them to you. And so to lead, for the masculine to lead the feminine in a godlike way is to lift up, to empower, to encourage, to strengthen, to embolden. That's to love in a godlike way. And so to insert little mortal ideas about the tyrannical nature of masculinity into that scripture, I think, is to place a little lens over something much deeper. You know, I think it's just like looking at that. It's like you have a picture right here and you're looking through a little roll of paper and you go, well, this part right here says that the woman should submit to the man, not in the way that you're saying that the masculine and the feminine achieve an eternal bond when the masculine will do anything for the feminine and the feminine submits to the masculine. Both sides of that together do not sound like they're setting up women to be abused or controlled, because that's not what Christ does for the church. Christ liberates the church. And so, like, Christ takes people from having to go to temples to buy contact with God or perceived contact with God to being able to have their own individual connections with God. And was so radical about that he even said, don't call anybody father. You know, so if any pastor goes, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years and I've got a fucking 3-letter acronym in front of my name that means I have the authority to tell you about God. middle finger to him, because that's not what Jesus said. Call no man on earth father, trying to encourage every individual to have a unique relationship with the divine, to submit in a feminine sense to the divine, but that
Okay.
but that for the creation to submit to the creator is for the creation to be liberated from illusion, liberated from constriction, to be liberated from that, not to be introduced to a new constriction, because it's not
Like
God.
liberation from kind of your sense of self, like your ego, that you are something
Yeah,
on your own.
what I'm thinking of right now is all the limitations that people place on you. So like if you're loving the woman that you're in a relationship with, if she's got ideas floating around in her head that limit her potential because of things that people told her, then your job to love her in the way that Christ loved the church is to free her from all of that garbage,
Mhm.
and exhort her or encourage her in who she is, and free her from all the limitations that people place on her, and and in whatever way you can, help her have her own individual connection with the divine, so that she doesn't have to rely on anybody, even you. Because Christ, he said to Mary, don't cling to me. And so that's like when you're praying for, let's say you're praying with your partner, you have a girlfriend or a wife, and you're praying for her and praying with her, you're praying for her to not need you. You're praying for her to have her own relationship with the divine, her own relationship with God. She submits to God, you submit to God. That's the way in which Christ loved the church. And if you love her in that way, she will submit to you, not because she needs you and relies on you, but because why the fuck wouldn't you trust a person who loves you like that? Like, what would be the downside? Why would we not trust Christ? It doesn't make any sense. Who told us, you don't need this whole system. They're going to kill me for saying this, but you don't need them. You can contact God. God created you. Here's how to pray. I'll tell you how to do it. Submit to God. Be freed of all this shit. And what happened with all the people who learned from Christ was that they became absolutely radically gangster, badass, bold. They're in court with people who are about to kill them, and they're saying, I stand for nothing but God, and there's nothing you can say to change that. Christ rose from the dead. And they're saying, fuck you, that disrupts our power structure. And they're going, I don't care, kill me. God, that Jesus made superheroes out of these people. And they trusted him, because why wouldn't you? And why wouldn't your woman submit to you if submitting to you meant constantly being encouraged, empowered, lifted up, strengthened, and
Yeah.
it's not so once you achieve that level, is there really a difference between the way that the woman loves the man and the way that the man loves the woman? Maybe in the sense that there's a difference between red and blue, but not that red or blue are more valuable than the other, but that marriage is for a woman and a man to become one organism that is now an androgynous, half woman, half man organism. It's not what the man wants or what the woman wants. It's now the combined will of the two. And I don't even like C.S. Lewis's explanation when he says that the reason that the man needs to be the leader of the relationship is so that there can be a tiebreaker when the woman and the man disagree, that it defaults on the man getting what he wants.
That
I
seems
think
really stupid and shallow.
Bullshit.
Yeah, that's
No,
nothing.
because would Christ love the church in that way? If the church needed one thing but Christ needed another, we'd go with Christ? That's retarded. It would
Right.
go with what is needed by the people who Christ was committed to serve at the expense of his own life and comfort and free will, everything. Christ didn't come and go, I got the freedom, we do what I want. So if you're loving your wife in that way, sorry, honey, I got a job in Nebraska. That's where we're going.
Right.
That's not how Jesus acted. It's not like that. It's not that you get the tiebreaker, that you have the authority to be the tiebreaker in disagreements. It's nonsense.
That's goofy.
It's because Christ and the church, if the church is like, hey, it'd be better for me if we were here, then Christ would be here. Christ went to where the people needed him. So if a man and a woman are in a relationship and it's better for the family and better for the woman to live A, but the husband's individual will makes him want to live in B, then he would choose what was self-sacrificial and he would go to A. not be the tiebreaker in the direction of his own individual will. I think that's nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's this is getting at the Christian vision of leadership that's so goddamn brilliant that if you orient yourself around that which makes you of greatest service to others, you will simultaneously orient yourself to what you're best at and what makes you greatest. If what you're focused on is how can I be of most benefit to others, then you forget about all of your stupid conceptions of who you are, and you just go, you know what I'm best at is writing books. And so what people would benefit from, like the one thing I could do that would benefit people most is write books. So you let go of all your fear of, are people going to like my books? Am I going to be a famous author and all that? And you just start writing books, not because of what you want, not because of the glory, but because you want to do the one thing that's going to benefit people most. And in doing so, you end up becoming an author that's recognized for greatness.
Yeah.
Because you did what would be, so to think in a service-oriented way is to end up being given the glory. Not to take the glory, but to give the glory away, do what's most service-oriented, and in the end be given the glory back. And that loops back to the concept of being the feminine consciousness. Because if the feminine aspect of consciousness is to let reality impose itself upon you, then ultimately what you will find is that reality is a lot smarter and better and purer than you are. So if you could just, as Alan Watts says, look at everything that you consider not you and say, your turn. Let's see what you're going to do. Set your own individual will aside and look at the universal will and say, your turn. Let's see what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Give up control. That is a feminine submission to God. But the problem, so if someone's listening to this and they're going, no, this is a dangerous message because you're saying that women should submit. And women submitting can get them seriously burned, which is absolutely true.
Sure.
So women, you should submit to God because God's not going to fuck you over. And God knows what you want way more than you. You should not pick a random man that you have an attachment to and submit to that, because that's not God and that's not Christian. Call no man on earth daddy.
Yeah.
Submit to God, and the rest will orient itself around that. That's feminine submission, but it's only dangerous if you submit to something dangerous. So the message that it's feminine to submit to something that will absolutely never do you wrong. There's nothing dangerous about that.
Mm-hmm.
And attaching the modern ideas, the postmodern obsession with combating the patriarchy to the basic archetypal forces of masculinity and femininity, and then to not get them, it just blows it, completely blows it.
Yeah.
Because the very point of understanding what is essentially masculine and what is essentially feminine is to transcend that dualism completely and understand what's neither this nor that, and understand that you're in union with that and you're with God right now. You're in the Father and the Father is in you right now. Reality is penetrating you and you're penetrating reality right now. If you can remove the sexual connotation from that, all the mortal finite ideas about what that means, that's real genuine spirituality. That's also what communion is Catholics are really protective about communion. They don't want to just let anybody do communion because they're afraid that those people don't get it. Mm-hmm. And there's a point to that, which is when they consume the bread and they drink the wine, they believe that they are literally consuming God. They believe that God is literally penetrating them in that moment. And so,
interesting. And that's kind of true because all things are God?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's panentheistic. I saw a spiritual director who told me that there is something sexual about communion, and I had to think about that for a long time because I was like, that's creepy. It's especially creepy because there's a lot of priests who rape people, like an absolutely obscene amount of priests who rape people. So that really rubbed me the wrong way, and I had to, like a priest, and I had to think about that for a long time, and that's what I realized, that because sometimes that in communion, the priest actually sets the bread in their mouths. They go up like little baby birds, and they go, and the priest sets the bread in their mouth. And there is something that's vaguely sexual about that, but the meaning of it does get people to unity consciousness, which is God is currently penetrating you, And that's modeled in the example or symbol of this bread that I'm setting into your mouth. But God penetrates the congregation through the priest is true symbolically. And maybe there's even something about the abuse that is a perversion of that doctrine, you know? Maybe that doctrine being twisted up in the minds of these people even has something to do with that.
Yeah, I could see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've heard the reason they do it is that they have this lie that that by putting people through hardships, you're ultimately bringing them to God. They have that all twisted up. That because when you go through hardships, you can end up closer to God. And so you're going, well, we'll just abuse these kids right to God.
I think it affects karma. I think that probably like bad things happening to you affects karma in some way, in a way that might be positive for you.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know exactly how they have all that
Not
twisted
that,
up.
not that I'm advocating, but
Right.
yeah.
Right. They obviously have a way of justifying it
Yeah.
because it's systematic. So they have a justification and it's a secret doctrine. And so I'm not saying the Catholic Church is a bunch of saints, but there's something really true about the not communism, communion, that's what communion is. It's the acknowledgement through the symbol of the bread and the wine that God is entering your body, and that is in a sense spiritually becoming female. And I think that this is kind of a side note. I think chapter 6 of the Tao Te Ching, which says know the masculine but hold to the feminine. I think one way to interpret that is that knowledge is masculine, but wisdom is feminine. Wisdom is also called feminine in Proverbs. Repeatedly refers to wisdom as a she, that she, Lady Wisdom, guides you. And so I think knowledge is masculine, it is more masculine, and wisdom is more feminine. In other words, knowledge and masculine are both sub-archetypes of yang, and femininity and wisdom are both sub-archetypes of yin. There's something that they're related. And so in that verse, it's saying, know the masculine, but hold to the feminine. So it's referring to faith, something that you subjectively possess as feminine, but knowledge, something that you objectively possess as masculine. And so it's evoking those sub-archetypes to help people understand the yin and yang. Because once you have all of those yang sub-archetypes stacked up and all those yin archetypes stacked up, and now you understand just the yin and the yang, now you're just one step away from being able to gaze at the Tao that can't be described. You got anything to add right now? I'm scrolling through my notes to see if there's anything I wanted to say that I skipped over.
There's a couple things that have like sort of been on my mind while we've been talking. One was the I don't know, the analogy of the two suitors, which we talked about in Cosmos and Psyche. The idea that like if there were two suitors that were attempting to understand the world and how it functioned, and well, but I guess to take the analogy the way it's supposed to be done, if there's two men that are interested in a particular woman, and one of them is just attempting to try and figure out how she works so he can say what he has to say to get what he wants from her, and the other one is seeking to understand her because he wants to sincerely get to know her and like understand how they could work together. He draws that parallel to like one guy or one person that's trying to understand the world because they want to understand how they can best wield it or how they can best like use its resources for whatever thing that person's will wants. Whereas the other person might view the world as something intelligent to understand and communicate with and work with. And that this talk reminds me of that because that second good suitor is much more of like a feminine approach to trying to understand the world.
Right.
Which is something that is not just material. There is more to it than that.
Yeah.
Whereas that other view is like the more masculine way to attempt to just sort of assert your will over the world, or like seeking to gain knowledge via intelligence, like
right.
instead of like seeking understanding through wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example.
And shit, I lost the other one. I'll come back to it.
I had nothing to add to that last one.
Okay.
It's just a great thought. Another example I thought of is that so I went surfing one time,
Me
and
too.
nice. Was it in California?
Oregon.
Coast for your high school trip?
Oregon. Yeah.
Nice. I went in San Diego when I was there for work, like a mental health conference.
Okay.
And it had a huge impact on me psychologically. It's something that I kept thinking back to afterwards when I faced hardship for years. And I don't think about it super often anymore, but I feel like the first year or two afterwards, I just kept on thinking about it over and over and over again. Because there was something about acknowledging that the wave was coming, whether I liked it or not, and deciding just what I was going to do about it, that just made something click in my brain about how to face hardships. Because there's a part of me that always like dwelled over hardships when hardships came, instead of going, this is here, what am I going to do from here? There was a hyper masculine controller subpersonality of mine that would take the steering wheel and go, I wish this fucking wasn't happening, even though it was anyway.
Yeah.
And when you're surfing, the ocean is like so unspeakably powerful that it's just like, get on the board or not. It's just like you're going to have salt in your eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, or you're going to have a blast, one or the other. And I ended up picking it up pretty quick. And I'm usually a really cautious person. Like if I start going too fast on a longboard, this is the last time I've ever gone longboarding, or actually only time I've ever last time I bombed a hill. As soon as I started going fast enough that any wobbles happened, I just jumped off and ate shit by choice, because I couldn't handle not knowing where I was going to go on this board.
Yeah.
I'd rather just choose to fuck myself up
Yeah.
here. And but surfing was like so much more intimidating that it just took the choice away. And so all that to say, I had to become feminine. I had to become female to surf.
Right.
I had to look at the ocean and go, hey, I submit to you, it is what it is. I submit to you, I trust you, and I'm going to make the most of this, and I'm going to have a great time, and I did. And afterwards, I had an easier time embracing yin when a situation came up, instead of just yanging my head against the wall. Instead,
That's good.
I could step back into submission. And I think this is great for men and women. Know when to submit and know when to impose. Like, women often have to be coached into negotiating, and coached into being disagreeable, and coached into pushing back. Like, I've been like telling Brooke, like, you can just tell your work no. Like, if they tell you to work here, work this time, and then they tell this time, like, she's like, I want to, like, my natural instinct is to submit and say, I'll just come in at this time. And I'm coaching her into yanging that situation and going like you have nothing to feel guilty for. You only owe them something when you're on the clock. They do not own you. If they said 4:30 and now they say, can you do 3:30? It's a question, because no is an option. And like, women sometimes have to be coached in that way.
Sure.
Like, no, you got to tell them to fuck off. You got to become male in this one, and just tell them to fuck off. And so it's not that women should always act in the way that is archetypally feminine, and men should always act in the way that's archetypally masculine, even if it were the case that the basic archetypal force of femininity and the basic archetypal force of submission were 100% overlapped, which they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that were the case, we're not all 100% men. It's not like we were bred by men and women were bred by women. We're not separate black and white things. You are whatever portion of masculinity and femininity happens to make up your being. And so this is the second part where I wanted to bring up astrology, because I mentioned Richard Tarnas' explanation of what the archetypes are in Cosmos and Psyche. Second thing I wanted to bring up is that when you do a full natal chart, you get a number of rated 1 through 10, how feminine you are and how masculine you are. And so Brooke is 6 feminine, 4 masculine, and I'm 6 masculine, 4 feminine. And so if that's the case, if I'm 60% masculine and she's 60% feminine, that's going to come out as me being way more masculine and her being way more feminine, and us generally assuming those roles. But you're not,
because you're 50% more masculine than her, which is a lot when you put it that way.
it is a ton,
Yeah.
especially when the situations that call for being one or the other tend to be like the noticeable situations where that type of shit pops out. Like we were driving one time and we almost crashed into this guy, and he pulled over and he hops out of the driver's seat and starts walking towards the car, and Brooke freezes up and grabs the steering wheel, and I point to my side of the car and hop out to say, like, hey, if you're coming over here to fight, the man's on this side of the car, stay away from that side of the car. And Brooke just kind of like, all right, I'm just gonna like wait through this. That's Brooke can fight too. It's not like Brooke doesn't fight and I fight. Like, I don't fight often at all, and Brooke is perfectly capable of fighting too. But when a situation calls for it, she just leans this way and I just lean this way.
Right.
You know, and it doesn't mean, oh, I'm 100% man, she's 100% women. It just means when it comes down to it and we lean and we branch off like this, I take this role and you take that role naturally. We didn't have a plan. Hey, if anyone threatens us physically, you know, but they're natural roles that emerge as situations come up. And so I don't think that enlightenment means to be 50% masculine, 50% feminine. I don't think that every individual needs to become gender androgynous to be enlightened. But I think that when you release your own personal attachments to your ideas of masculinity and femininity, and you say, you know what, I'm just going to be what I am, then if you happen to be a man who is more feminine than masculine, then just relax and just be that. Or if you're just 50-50, then just relax and just be that. That's totally fine. In your most natural, most relaxed, and least artificially steered state, you are whatever makeup you naturally are. Maybe you're 70-30, maybe you're 50-50, maybe you're 90-10. Whatever it is, just don't try to be anything, and you will naturally be whatever your soul's ratio of masculinity and femininity happen to be. And whatever that is, it's going to be, I think it's generally the case that people want to be what they really are. And they try to be what they really are, which sometimes leads them further away from being what they really are. And so I think that when we're insecure about our place on the gender spectrum, when we're insecure about our gender role, we can get closer to what we really, really, really deep down desire by just not trying. And that's really freeing to go to that in the place of unity consciousness, to go, I'm not masculine or feminine, I'm just going to be. Then you can just fall naturally into whatever place you were made to be. Don't try to be 50-50 and go, well, the universe is half masculine, half feminine, so I ought to be, or I don't properly reflect the divine. No, you were born east and you were born west and you were born male and you were born female, and just be that piece of it, be that cell in the body of Christ that you happen to be born as. That's fine, as long as you understand that neither masculinity nor femininity are better than the other. These are, the yin yang doctrine is that they're inseparable and equal forces, but also that they have different characteristics. So also don't say that, because there's obviously, in any time that there's two things that are different, there's pros and cons to each.
Yeah.
So for the love of God, stop trying to erase all pros of being male, because all pros of being male are currently under attack by liberal postmodernists, which is just crazy, because there's pros and cons to being female and there's pros and cons to being male. And a lot of the time what people mean when they say the genders need to be equal is everybody should be the same, right, which will destabilize society at an unbelievably destructive rate if you try to force everybody to be the same. It's like taking two people on either end of a teeter-totter and saying, both of you stand in the center. It's not possible, and both of you will eat shit if you try to do that.
Yeah.
Try to force people to be the same, but go, hey, both of you sit wherever you want to sit, because ultimately it's not a teeter-totter. Ultimately, it's more like a disc balancing on a point in the middle. And if everybody stands in their own place, it's stable. Yeah. You want to be masculine? Dope. You're a man that wants to act like a chick? Dope. Everybody do your thing. Just do exactly what's natural
Yeah.
to you, exactly what feels most comfortable to you at the deepest level. And I think that I think part of the reason that the LGBTQ thing has gotten way excessively artificially out of control is that people are encountering an aspect of gender in themselves that they're not familiar with, and then attaching and identifying to that, to go to, because it's frightening as a man to encounter the feminine within yourself.
Sure.
And so a man can do that, can encounter the feminine within themselves and go, I'm actually a woman, and let go of the pole they were clinging to, masculinity, and grab onto this other pole, femininity, and go, I'm going to cling to this instead, and I'm going to get praised for it on social media. And to teach people, look, these are both forces. Both of these forces exist within you. They're different. There's pros and cons to embodying each. Do whatever's most natural to you. They both exist within you. That's fine. Like I have a male friend who tells me that to embrace his feminine, he sometimes wears a dress at home with his girlfriend, and that's fun for them. And he's just going, I'm kind of feminine in this way, and I'm like, fucking cool, man. Like express that in a way that's like comfortable for you, and do that, because it's better to individuate yourself into being more whole by expressing yourself in that way, whatever way that you need to, and go, yeah, I feel a little girly sometimes, I feel a little this and that sometimes. That's better than suppressing it, and then attaching to it and going through an instant psychological transformation, where now that transgenderism has gone up like 4,000% or something in an absolutely ridiculous span of time, because we have so suppressed the meanings of masculinity and femininity that people are just fucking confused about it. They just go,
Sure.
there's femininity within myself. Maybe I'm a girl. It's like, don't make sharp turns, make gradual turns.
Yeah.
Wear a dress. Go, just do what you got to do to explore that aspect of yourself. Just be gentle with yourself. Don't take sharp turns. They hurt. We haven't seen yet the repercussions of the totally artificially and when I say artificially, I mean not this many people are genuinely transgender, but a cultural fad is pushing them to be, especially in teenage girls, completely out of control. We haven't seen the consequences yet. They're going to be crazy.
It's happening more to teenage girls?
Yes, teenage girls are by far the population transitioning in gender most quickly.
As in girls to boys?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and teenage girls have historically been more susceptible to societal pressure, peer pressure, than men.
Yeah.
Not a stereotype, not saying 100% of women are and 100% of men aren't, whatever. They lean in that direction. They're more susceptible, and this movement is abusing young girls. And the answer is not, it's not the conservative fundamentalist answer, girls are 100% girls and boys are 100% boys. But the answer is also not, if you ever feel like a girl, cut your dick off. So
That ain't it, you don't think?
it's somewhere in the middle that is like, embrace the femininity and masculinity within yourself, consider the forces to be equal, be whatever balance that you are, and understand that you won't understand union with God unless you understand whatever element yourself you're least familiar with, and unless you understand that you are God's wife, that creation is Creator's wife, in the sense that when we submit to that trustworthy leader, we are given encouragement, empowerment, freedom, and liberation. So be God's wife in that sense. And in that sense, to spiritually awaken, you have to become the universe's girlfriend, God's wife, however you want to call it. You have to allow yourself to be penetrated by reality, to then understand that you're at union with it and not imposing yourself on it, and break the hyper-masculine myth of materialism. So I think that's all I got, bro.
Okay. I remember the thought I was going to say before. I have been thinking a bit about like the idea of cosmic consciousness, then God consciousness, then unity consciousness. It's interesting that like, because God is typically personified as male. And the Bible says that we should become the bride of God. And I often think about like the fact that God is personified as male is like kind of evidence of sort of a patriarchal line of thought. But when you combine it with like the notion that like we are meant to become the brides of God, it I guess it kind of makes sense that unity is above God because it's like God plus us. Like God split off. Like God was gender neutral at some point, and then he split off his femininity, and like we are his femininity
In
in some
the
way.
Sure, in the sense that some Gnostics interpret the Genesis story of Adam and Eve to be that there was an androgynous being at one point, and then the feminine was taken out of the masculine. In other words, the divine,
Yeah, that makes sense.
the divine divided itself into masculinity and femininity, and that's what the Adam and Eve story actually means.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily that woman was created from man in the sense that man came first. It was that, and this was mistranslated and misunderstood by the male leaning culture of the time, that God is genderless, and the fall, or the beginning of the illusion that there is separateness between self and God, included God dividing itself into femininity and masculinity,
Mhm.
and that it's an illusion that those are separate.
Gotcha. But yeah, I like the idea that I like that idea, the idea that like unity consciousness is like like that God isn't even the highest thing there is because God is missing us. So he is currently incomplete because he's missing us.
Oh, I fuck with that. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't listened to my meditation teacher was gonna show me a DVD on Maharishi talking about those levels of consciousness, and I haven't seen it yet. So I don't know what Maharishi meant. I can't speak on what he meant by those levels of consciousness. But based on spitballing on the labels, it seems to me like he's saying that God is like creator consciousness, and that unity is like creator creation consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I don't know what cosmic consciousness. Maybe cosmic consciousness is like creation consciousness. Like
Yeah,
I
I
am
was thinking it's
cosmically
all the
of
stuff.
creation.
It's just all the stuff that's here, including
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
So you achieve union with all of creation, and then you understand the perspective of creator, and then you understand that there's no separation between creator and creation.
That sounds
That
good.
could be what he meant.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch that DVD and then
Yeah.
see if our spitballing got at what he meant.
Probably close.
Fuck
Maybe.
it.
What happened when the guy approached the car?
Oh, he wasn't even coming up to the car. He was angrily fast walking toward us. So before he even got past his back bumper, I had pointed at my side of the car and looked at him and started getting out of the car, and then he turned at his back bumper and he was just making sure we didn't hit him.
Oh, okay.
He was just looking at his truck, and then he just got back in the truck.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
Good ending.
it's fun.
I don't think I have anything else.
Cool.
All right.
You got any thoughts, Evan?
No.
Cool.
Thanks for sharing.
Nice, cool.
Night school.